Okay. Shane, can you hear me all right?
Yep, I can hear you just fine. I think I'm good now.
Okay. All right, perfect. One of the things that I'm really excited about and having you on here, Shane, if first of all, is the power of a geothermal, a passive solar greenhouse, a system that can be operated passively for families, really has a potential and a power. And so, you know what we do? We travel the country right now. We're teaching permaculture design. We collaborate with a lot of other organizations and individuals to help families build and design a haven of their own. And a haven, by our definition, is a safe harbor from the storm. It's a place that families can come away to and find safety and solace. And in the mix of all of that, greenhouses really play a key role. They're really a kind of that pivotal difference on whether or not a family can achieve self-sufficiency in a lot of different climates and in a lot of different parts of the country. So I'm super excited to see what you have to talk about today. I'm going to pass the book over to you now.
Okay.
If you have any questions for me, feel free to shoot them my way
Okay. Now,
and go from there.
okay, great. Okay, how's that? Are you seeing that at all? It says I'm sharing. I'm just not sure how that resolution looks.
Yeah, it looks good on my side.
Okay, we're going to just get going then. So my name's Shane Watson. Email right there, Shane Watson PE. I am a professional engineer. I do structural engineering, primarily on big power lines, but I do a lot of residential and farms and barns and stuff like that. I live in a very rural area. Um, we are, I guess, what you would in the modern terms call homesteaders, modern homesteading. I used to live on a large dairy farm, corporate dairy farm. I hauled milk and drove a truck and pushed a lot of feed and pushed a lot of poo around. And that's how I kind of started my life. And then through life, I ended up as an engineer. And so I'm still very interested in growing things and being kind of that agriculturally minded. So we live in a tiny little town in Utah, and we live about 4 miles outside of a town of 3,000 people. So we're very rural. And I have a few Dexter cows that I raise. We raise our own eggs. We have the greenhouses, and we do a lot of this kind of system to try to be as self-sufficient as we can. And a lot of that is an experiment for me on how to be as efficiently self-sufficient as possible. So we've done a lot of fodder. Uh, we've raised a lot of cows and pigs on fodder. We've done a lot of chickens on fodder. Um, Around the valley here that I live in, I have actually set up 7 different fodder systems now, and we're on our 9th greenhouse that we've done that are similar to this one that you're seeing here. Um, so we've been playing around with this for close to 15 years now, and we're having a lot of fun with it. Um, it's starting to get a lot more popular, and I think a lot of that aspect is, from my perspective, is that people are willing to spend more money on it because to do this right, I don't think is a very cheap endeavor. The little hot houses or high tunnels that a lot of times we see, they don't work very well in central Utah because we get such high winds, such high temperature fluctuations. I'll go from 100 degrees to the coldest I've seen here is 27 below. So that's a pretty significant temperature swing. And it's tough to build just a little high tunnel or something that works for that. So, as the world goes a little more crazy, we are definitely seeing people being more willing to invest in, both educationally and financially, be more invested in what a real greenhouse should look like. So, as I said, I have a very agrarian background, and I'm now a structural engineer. And so that's kind of the aspect that I come at from looking at this. I am not the world's best gardener, and I have killed a lot of plants, and I will continue to kill a lot of plants. And I'm pretty good at killing a lot of plants. So this is definitely for me, this is like a physics experiment, thermodynamics, and there's a lot of that goes into this, and it's a lot of fun. And it allows me to kill a lot of plants. And we can talk about that a little bit later, but I have learned a tremendous amount about, my water quality. The pH of my water here is 8.5. The pH of my soil is 8.3. I've learned a lot about what's killing those plants and how to, anyway, so it's been a huge education. Let me start jumping in now. As I said, please speak up if you have any questions. This is my house, my greenhouse that we're looking at here on the front page here. Just taken a few months ago. We've had, for those of you that aren't in this Mountain West region, we have had about 250 to 300% of normal snowfall, and the highest snowfall ever recorded in this area. So it's been a pretty wild winter. So this is a picture of my greenhouse this winter as we dealt with 6 months of snow on the ground. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some greenhouse. A couple of examples really quickly. We'll just kind of blow through this. Kind of the lowest level would be kind of these just little boxes that you kind of warm things up and keep them out of the frost. There's lots of examples. These that we call them a cold frame. That's kind of like the lowest example of what I would consider. The next would be the hoop house that I talked about a little bit before. This is the common state or the natural state of a hoop house. And this is why I hate hoop houses. And if you want a hoop house, don't talk to me, because I really hate hoop houses. They just fall apart. They don't work very well throughout the year. And if they last an entire year, they're the longest living hoop house I've ever seen. So I really hate them. A lot of people want them, and those people want to usually just expand their season. I live at 6,500 feet elevation. We have a tremendous amount of snow on normal years. We are still not to my frost date yet this year. My frost dates are about June 5 to June 10, usually is pretty safe for me. So in my area, people really want to do these hoop houses because they just really need to lengthen their season. We can't ripen tomatoes in my area. So melons and squash, or squash is a little bit easier, but you'd have to start them inside the house or something. Melons is almost a no-go here. So hoop houses are pretty popular. I'm in the second poorest county in Utah, so people don't have a lot of money and they do want to extend their season. So this is very popular. This one that you see over on the right side, the lower right side, this is a picture that I took here locally, and I could take 200 of those in one afternoon just driving around the county. So I understand the draw or the attraction of these hoop houses or high tunnels, but I just hate them. They don't work very well, and they're in 12 months, you've wasted your money. So we'll talk about that a little more as we keep going. Kind of the next level up, I would call a frame. There's not really maybe an official name for some of these, but this is what I would call a framed greenhouse. And by the same token, these are probably, I mean, the one on the right is kind of a rendering from a Chinese company selling these. You can tell that that's all fake. And the reason you can tell is because the vents are working and everything is straight lines. That's how you can tell it's fake. I have a neighbor who put in one of these aluminum framed greenhouses, and it literally lasted a week. And it was completely trashed. The wind just completely disassembled it, bent every single member of it was completely destroyed. The one that you see on the left here is maybe a little better. It's definitely framed in there with some quality components. However, they have some pretty cheap plastic, which is definitely a weak point. So frame greenhouses I'm okay with. They definitely can work a lot better. But if you just buy it from Harbor Freight or something similar to that, I think you're probably wasting your money again. As I mentioned, the one my neighbor put in lasted 1 week. Okay, so geodesic dome. The one on the right, again, is kind of a rendering. That's the optimal view that people think that they want in their backyard. That's the one on the left. The one on the right is my neighbor's. And I have another neighbor who designed it and helped build it into this neighbor's yard. And it's a beautiful greenhouse and it's really cool. He's trying to do the tilapia inside, and he's got some citrus, and he's got some of the neatest and most creative design I've ever seen. But he also has a 14 kW solar system that just feeds this, as well as a backup propane tank in order to heat it. It's not energy efficient whatsoever, and it's very limited on what it can grow. It can't grow any, and we can get into this a little bit later as well, but because he's growing on a raft over the fish, he's not able to grow the same kind. He grows a lot of lettuce and he grows a lot of leafy things, maybe some radishes a little bit. But from my perspective, I'm trying to grow calories for people to live on, and I don't want my family to live on salad. I'm expecting my family to live on things like sweet potatoes. So my greenhouse, I idealize it towards sweet potatoes, citrus, the very colorful, the very difficult things that won't grow outside that provide a tremendous amount of nutrition. Um, that's what my greenhouse space is for. Greenhouse space is expensive. Why would I grow potatoes in my greenhouse when I can grow potatoes outside? So in this one, he grows a lot of lettuce and leafy stuff because he's doing it on the rafts over the fish. And I just kind of disagree with that kind of concept of what the greenhouse if you're feeding people, don't feed them lettuce. That's not the way to raise a family or whatever. So anyway, kind of a little bit of a rant for me, but he does have the fish and he's producing the fish. They are not producing well, they're not spawning, and that's a common problem with those fish systems. They're so difficult to keep the fish so healthy that they'll actually spawn, that I have decided to not mess with that. And all of the advantages that you would get from having the fish in the greenhouse and performing all of that effort, I can get the same equivalence from just having turkeys, chickens, pigs, and cattle somewhere nearby so that I can compost that and bring it back into the greenhouse. And we can talk more about that here in just a minute. So next it would be more of the Wallapini style. I've seen some of these that are pretty cool. I've seen some of these that are so unbelievably stupid, it's amazing people would put money into it. I've seen some that work quite well. I've seen some that become a, a very well-lit dungeon that I don't know what people do with them. And we can talk about how to make it better than just a dungeon here in just a minute, and I'll go into what I've learned about that. But this is effectively a Wallapini is something that's sunk down into the ground and gets a lot of thermal advantage from the earth. Sorry. So this is what I call my modified Wallapini. The back wall is about 12 feet into the ground. The entire greenhouse is sunk down in about 3 feet. And then the east wall is about 9 feet in the ground. And then you have the door there you can see on the left corner that you can walk right into. So the whole thing is about 3 feet down, but I have a lot of dirt around the north and the east sides of it. So this is my greenhouse as we were putting it together. And so when I'm talking to people about how they're going to start their greenhouse, I really think it's important at first to establish your goals. Do you want to, I'm at 6,500 feet. Do I just want to ripen up tomatoes and get some melons to ripen through the year? Or is my goal a little more ambitious? Do I want to have some sweet potatoes that have like 100-day cycle? And do I really have some aggressive ambitions about that, or am I just thinking I'm going to grow some spinach all through the winter, and I maybe want to have a little better production on my tomato crop? Because you can do this pretty cheaply, and you can do this pretty expensively, as I have. So that brings us to number 2 here. Establish your budget, and then it's 2023, so establish your budget and then triple it. So then you kind of need to, this doesn't really apply to me, but it is a very legitimate issue. You need to look at, does your municipality have a limit how close you can be to your property lines, how high you can be? Do you need permitting? Do you need engineering? I'm an engineer, so I frequently provide the engineering package for these and help people out with that. So that can become a pretty big hurdle in some areas. In some areas, it's not a hurdle at all. So just kind of understand some of those limitations. and get educated on your area before you even start, and kind of write that down and write what your priorities are. So as we pick our goals, these are some of the extremes that I've seen. Do you just want to extend your season a little bit, or are you literally trying to grow bananas in Siberia? Like those are kind of the opposite ends of that spectrum, and both of them are totally possible. We can just build a little box, keep your plants warm through the night so you can plant into your frost season. Or if you want to grow bananas in Siberia, it's going to take a lot more effort, but you can do that. If you just want to plant a couple of flowers and a few veggies, that's pretty easy too. If you want to have a full survival garden, maybe you're going to want to scratch your head a little longer and figure out exactly what kind of plants you're going to grow, and know that you're trying to gear this greenhouse to a certain maybe a climate zone. I have a friend who has one greenhouse that's just kind of a normal greenhouse. He's got a second one under construction right now that we helped him design, that is for a subtropical environment. And as soon as he's done with that, he's doing the third one for a tropical environment. And I think that's a really cool way to do that. He knows the expense and the risk of all of those. And he knows that he's going to be able to keep that kind of separated, and he understands those goals. Do you want like a full service greenhouse? You have power, you have water, you have propane or natural gas, whatever utilities to that, or are you trying to keep this completely off grid and independent of any demands that way? And then also, as we get into this a little more, you start to learn that you can walk out there every day and look at the dirt and stick your finger down it and see how wet it is. Or you can be standing in line at Disneyland, flip open your phone and realize that grow bed number 3 is a little bit low on its moisture level, hit a button and start watering your plants. So all of those are quite possible, and you just need to know your goals and what you're after. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the risks. This is Manti Homestead on the side here, and we'll see a few of his pages as we go through this. I encourage you to look at a lot at his website. We helped him with his design of his greenhouse. And then my son and I actually have a small welding shop here in town. And so what we try to do is help people design their greenhouses. And then, because the hard part is, number one, knowing how to design them, and number two, knowing where to get all of your trusses and your steel framing. We actually have a welding shop, and we design and build those steel trusses. So the steel trusses you see behind him here that are covered under the foam, those are trusses that we have built and delivered to him, and then they erected. But please make sure to look up Manti Homestead. He's got some really good videos. He's a really good guy. So let's talk about some of these problems that you'll see in greenhousing. Mold, very common problem. What's the easiest, most common solution for that problem? Is ventilation. Humidity, ventilation. Bugs and infestation, and we've seen a lot of different kinds of bugs. If you start getting a lot of spiders in there, you'll know that you have a lot of bugs because they're following that. And this is separate from just the typical like aphids and stuff. Those really follow. If you're putting too much nitrogen in, then the sap of your plants turns really sweet, and you'll end up attracting a lot of those aphids and other bugs like that. But even beyond that, you can get a lot of other really weird, crazy bugs and infestations in your greenhouse. And a lot of times the best solution is ventilation. I have a friend who also uses birds. He has a permanent population of finches in his greenhouse, and he has no bug or infestation problems at all. He does have a problem keeping his seedlings, but he just puts a screen over that until they're up strong enough that the birds won't kill the plants. Overheating, probably the biggest problem with greenhouse designs. Everybody worries about keeping it warm in the winter, and the real problem is keeping it somewhere less than the surface of the sun inside during the summertime. So the best solution for overheating problems, ventilation. Again, cold, that's the next biggest problem, is keeping it warm in the wintertime. And then we need to start looking at what kind of energy inputs we can have. How can we store that energy? What kind of features we can build into it. But I think that's definitely less of an issue than an overheating issue. And then water quality, this has been a big problem for me, and soil quality has been a huge problem for me. A lot of other places don't have nearly those kinds of issues, but I live in the Mountain West, and I have extremely alkaline soil and extremely alkaline water. So I've killed a lot of plants until I realized the effect of my water, and now I have to treat all of my water before I water my plants. It's doing much better. Okay, let's talk about the aspects that we really know that we need for good plant health. We know we need water. We know we need good, proper soil. You know, that has lots of microbes in it and is very healthy, good biology in your soil. We know we need some good environmental conditions. We can't get them too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry, and that too wet, too dry, too hot, too cold. That all depends on what your plant is. But atmospheric carbon, this is a really interesting one that we ignore way too much. And I really want to focus on atmospheric carbon here. So I'm going to back up a little bit. I'm going to step out of the greenhouse discussion for just a second, and I'm going to talk about this fodder system. About 13 years ago, we started playing around with producing fodder for our cattle. And at one point, I had about 30 cows, and we were producing all of the fodder for those cows. And we didn't feed them any hay or anything like that. We were just fodder. And I still have a couple of fodder systems around. This one pictured is in a reefer trailer, and just in that one little reefer trailer, we can produce enough for 30 cows year round. And it works quite well, and we like it. But here's what happened. In our first fodder system, we were in a garage. We were just experimenting with this. We had toured quite a few fodder systems around the state, even outside of the state, done a lot of learning online about it. And like I said, this is about 12, 13 years ago. So there was a lot less information back there. And so we started one just in a garage, and it worked quite well through the spring, fall, summer. It was quite effective. We thought we were geniuses because we were getting such great production rates compared to a lot of the other systems around that we had seen. And then as winter set in, we had a pretty cold winter, and our production rate collapsed, and we were getting almost nothing except for maybe some mold. And if you guys know what the hair looks like on the back of a pig, you know, it's kind of spiky little hairs that are kind of, occasional at best. And that's what our fodder looked like. And we couldn't figure out what was going on. And for weeks and weeks, we were tracking all the humidity, the temperature. We realized that our water coming out of the tap was 40 degrees, and it was stunting everything. So we started warming the water. We put a big hose and we mounted it to the ceiling so that it would get to the warmest of the temperature of the room. And we watered so little at the time that it wouldn't even completely drain that hose. So we knew that we were always warming about 75-degree water. We were watering with warm water, and it would warm up the next length of the hose before we had to water again. So it worked quite well, but it didn't fix the problem. And so I'm talking to my friend on the phone. We had this system set up in his garage, and I told him that, well, if you don't mind, I'd like to come over and see it, and just maybe I can come up with some ideas. But I have pneumonia, and I'm not sure if you want me to come over. And he said, no, you're fine. Come on over. So I went over, and I had this terrible case of pneumonia that winter. And I'm standing around in his garage for about a half an hour, and we're going through all of his records of production rate and temperature, humidity, and what we've done, what we haven't done, how many pounds of seed. I mean, lots. And he's a very good record keeper. And after about a half an hour, we have no idea. And I just said, oh, Jared, I know exactly what the problem is. You have too much oxygen. I feel fantastic. This is the best I've felt in weeks. And all of that tightness and the pain in my chest had completely loosened up. I was basically standing in a big oxygen tent. And so we went, it was kind of a light bulb moment for us. So we threw the door open. It's like 10 degrees outside. The temperature in the garage, and everything you read online, you've got to keep these things from like 69 to 74 degrees, and any variation of that is going to really affect your growth rate. So we were hesitant to let that temperature drop. We dropped that temperature in about 30 seconds. We dropped that temperature to 40 degrees inside. We closed the door back up. The next day, we had growth on every tray. We did that again every day for about 3 days. We had full growth like you're seeing here in front of you within the week. So this is actually the garage. If you see in the background there, you can see his water heater, and we've wrapped one of the hoses around that because it's just free energy, right? So we wrapped one of the hoses around that we would water the plants with. And what you're seeing in this picture is just standing seam roofing. We started experimenting so much with this. We started putting up extra trays. We put them in closets or bathrooms or kind of wherever we wanted. This is just junk standing seam roofing that we had salvaged from somewhere, and we threw some seed on it to see how it would go. So you don't need a fancy system. This is 8 days worth of growth on junk metal with about, I would say, a garden hose spraying on those for about maybe 1 minute per day in grand total. So we're talking, 3 to 4 waterings of 10 to 15 seconds usually. And this is the result that we're getting. Now, again, this is in a garage. This has no grow lights. You don't see any LEDs. You don't see any grow lights. And this is the kind of growth you get. So you can do really well with a really basic system for fodder, but you have to provide a tremendous amount of carbon. This was a completely new scenario for me. We had never considered the importance of carbon. We've looked at all of those atmospheric issues of the soil quality, whatever it is, but if you don't have carbon, you don't have growth. So getting a little more sciencey, because I am an engineer, and so I start to geek out on things. This is a chart here of proper carbon consumption, and you can see that their peak consumption is somewhere between about 800 and 1400 parts per million. Well, that 1400 is getting really close to where you're going to start to die. And that's where the plants are at their happiest. That dashed line on the left side, that's the natural normal air, 365 parts per million. That's what we have in atmospheric levels. So if you have a literal river of water, river of air, a constant breeze of fresh air blowing across your plants in your greenhouse, you're at approximately 1/5 of what those plants want. So you need to add a tremendous amount of carbon. Like if you don't have a constant breeze of carbon blowing across in a greenhouse, that's why it's a greenhouse. You got to kind of protect those plants in there. So carbon becomes a huge limiting factor very, very quickly. And again, I can't stress enough, you need almost 5 times the normal, and normal would be a slight breeze constantly providing fresh carbon to your plants. And so in a greenhouse, you're never going to hit that 365. You're always going to walk in there and you're going to feel a little bit of a rush because it's so oxygen rich that it feels good to you. You're going to walk in there and it's going to feel good. And that's how you know the plants don't have enough. So let's think about priorities here. Carbon, everything else, literally. Okay, sources of carbon dioxide. Let's talk about really quickly how we could provide carbon dioxide within our greenhouse. Obviously, the first thing that comes to your mind is burning tires, right? Everybody wants to just burn tires, but that attracts pests. So we don't want to attract pests. This is something I've played with quite a bit. So we're gonna talk about this a little bit. There are such things as carbon generators, and they're fired off of either natural gas or propane. In my area, we don't have a lot of natural gas, so we use propane. So we had a small fodder system, and I don't have any pictures of it in this presentation here, but it's about the same size as that one that was in the reefer system or the reefer trailer. And it was kind of just a side thought. It was on the side of a barn. We wanted to use it. We wanted to build some racks and be able to produce some fodder. We didn't have a good way to pipe in some fresh air, and the exhaust was going into the barn, which doesn't work very well. And we're going to talk about that quite a bit shortly. So we had piped in some fresh air, and anyway, it didn't work very well. And the biggest limit was the carbon. We had learned this now. This is probably the 4th system that we had built. So we were very aware of how important the carbon was. So we put this carbon generator in there, which is basically a really poorly efficient uh, heater, just a propane heater that doesn't work very well. And all you're after really is the carbon dioxide that comes off of it, which um, it's carbon monoxide, but it dissociates quickly into carbon dioxide. It's still very dangerous. So we have this little tiny room and it's boxed up pretty tight, and we've got this carbon dioxide generator blowing in there. I'm very worried because it's my friend's house. He's got some little kids. Carbon is a little bit heavier than normal air. So if you walked in there and got a little bit dizzy from it, your kid probably would walk in there and die. So I was very, very concerned about this. So we put up sensors, monitors, alarms. We locked the doors. I was extremely worried about having this kind of technology in there where a kid could walk in and get killed. So we put it in the system and we couldn't read any residual carbon on the gauges. After a lot of testing and trying to fight around with it and see why it wasn't working, we realized it was working. So as we added all of this carbon, the plants consumed it all immediately, and there was still no residual carbon in the room, even with this thing burning 24/7. So we added a second one. And we're talking about a room that's maybe 20 feet long, maybe 8 feet wide. And it's at this point, it's basically sealed up. And now we have two of these things with a little fan at each one, and they're burning full blast. I mean, they're burning as fast as your wallet can run them, which gets really expensive. Uh, as I mentioned, we're on propane here instead of the natural gas, so it was quite expensive. And so, but we're experimenting at this point. So we now have two of these running, and still not a single iota of this is showing up on the gauge. Now the fodder looks fantastic. We've got some of the best looking fodder, and our production rates are phenomenal. But we're also starting to get a lot of mold. When you see an airplane go overhead and you see that big trail behind it, or if you start your car in the wintertime and you're driving along and you see the little drips coming out of the tailpipe, those are because a side effect or a productive effect of combustion is water vapor. It simply is one of the things that comes from combustion. So by burning this propane in there, we had to stop watering, and the entire room is raining 24/7. It's so wet. We're pushing it into the drains and trying to get rid of all this water. And the water is all coming from the propane bottles. We burn those propane bottles, and that's all it is. So we're starting to get mold problems. We can't dry out the plants anymore. They don't need that much water, but they're still looking pretty good. They're very healthy. And what we've learned is, even with both of these running as fast as they can, as hard as they can, there was not one speck of residual carbon on the meter. So that's how much carbon you can spend a tremendous amount of money on carbon, and it won't be enough. So let me move on here a little bit. Okay, so problems with this. It does increase a little bit of heat. That could be a problem. It could be an advantage. There's a huge increase of humidity. There's a safety issue, and there's a significant cost problem. So just be aware that you can buy these. They're pretty cheap. You can get them on Amazon. I've got two of them out in my greenhouse that are collecting dust. I drag them out every once in a while when somebody stops by to learn about greenhousing. And I relate this whole anecdote and show them what the thing looks like. And I will probably never use it, although I still have the two of them. We no longer use either one of them. They're just so expensive to try to keep using that we have to come up with better methods. Okay, so wood and coal. This is a little burners, one of those efficient burner stoves here, and I managed to scare my 9-year-old with it. I think he was only like 7 at the time here, that you can see him, and I hit it with a little leaf blower and really got it ripping. So we've played with that a little bit. We've tinkered with. I've even pulled my barbecue grill into the greenhouse in the wintertime. Why not, right? It's all carbon for the air, and anything I can add in there is just better for the plants. Um, but this creates a lot of soot, your smoke, your attention. You have to go out there in the middle of the night. There's a lot of effort and definitely some risk. I don't want any of that. I want the carbon from the combustion, but how do I keep that carbon clean enough that I don't soot up the inside of my greenhouse? So it doesn't work very well. And there's ways you can spend a lot of money. I didn't put a picture in this presentation, But one of the greenhouses that I designed, my friend has, and he built a very large and very nice wood stove that's, you know, the zero, what do you call it? Anyway, the big ones with the chambers in them, and then the smoke goes through and it does a secondary burn on all that. It's a very big and very elaborate system. And so he's feeding that thing at 2 o'clock in the morning in the worst times of the year. And I feel bad for him because I don't do that. So here's another option that you could use. If you had inside of your greenhouse a compost bin, and sometime around early December, you start going in there and you load it up with a bunch of fresh compost. As that breaks down, it's going to warm up to good 100 to 150 degrees. It's going to put off a tremendous amount of carbon with a little bit of heat. And in the spring, when you're ready to use that again, man, it's just sitting right there. Now, it does attract some pests. It does stink. There's some disadvantages to it, but for crying out, it's a greenhouse. It's not your kitchen. So to me, this is a great idea. And I really like this method. It just provides a nice little mass of heat right in the middle of your greenhouse. It's also producing some carbon, which is just beneficial. So this is one of my favorite methods. But ultimately, air, right? About a fourth, 0.4% of our atmosphere is CO2. We need to use that. It's free. There's as much of it as you can get. If you can push all of that through, you need to use it. So really, let's try to use as much natural air as we can. And we're going to focus the entire design of the greenhouse based around this carbon. Because we talked about this a couple of slides ago. 5 of the 7 risks of a greenhouse, or the problems that can occur in your greenhouse, are fixed with ventilation. Well, ventilation just means flushing more carbon across your plants. So let's think about the entire design of the greenhouse in terms of how can I stuff more carbon in there and get rid of the oxygen. If we do that, we fix all the rest of the problems. So this is a couple of friends of mine that came over to the greenhouse last winter. We're going to quickly go through and design my greenhouse from my perspective of what I was doing with mine. So I wanted it to be off-grid capable, but I also know that it takes a lot of time for me to get everything the way I want it. So currently it's tied to the house, but I have a very tight budget of the power demand in the greenhouse, and I know that I can easily handle all of that power demand with a few solar panels and a small battery bank. So although I'm off-grid capable, I don't have that off-grid system set up at this moment, but I'm definitely within a budget that I have already set up. So I don't think it's valuable. There is a value. I don't think it's valuable enough to say that you have a zero power demand, because you can have so much more effectiveness from your greenhouse with a small amount of power, that having a solar power system is actually a very good way to expand the capabilities of your greenhouse. So I wanted to have some citrus and subtropicals, but I'm not attempting to grow through the heart of the winter. We get extremely cold here. The days are extremely short here. Even when on the couple of times that I've tried to grow through the winter, the days are so short, the plants don't respond. They just don't. Our coldest month is January, and the days are getting longer in January, and the plants start to really wake up and start growing about halfway through January. They respond better to the lengthening of the days, even though the temperatures are actually colder. So if it's just I'm not going to add a bunch of grow lights and whatever energy I need to try to force these plants to grow through the winter. I'm going to let everything have a rest. I'm going to let it all go dormant. I'm going to try to force it to stay as close to 30 to 40 degrees. And that means I actually ventilate it on a nice sunny day. I'm trying to push that temperature instead of letting it get to 60 or 70 degrees inside. I'm trying to force it to stay in those 30 to 40s, and then box it all up so it stays at 30 to 40 all through the night. So it is a little bit of work sometimes for me, but I want the whole greenhouse to just have a vacation, relax, go dormant for about 8 to 10 weeks through the worst of our winters. That might be different for you if you're down in a more sunny area. Then that could be very different for you. But I don't find it's worth it to invest the huge amount of energy that you need for a very limited return. So I call it a 3.5 season greenhouse because I have about 2 months, 2.5 months that it just goes dormant. I can start working on the structure, spend all my time shoveling snow is usually what I do. So there's lots of other things that I can do. Growing is probably not the best thing that I can try to do through those. I'm a busy guy. I work all around the country. I travel a tremendous amount. So I need something that's pretty low maintenance. That's a big priority for me. I don't want to have to walk in there every day. Spring and fall are definitely the riskiest times for a greenhouse because you have some nice, warm, sunny days, but you still get cold enough at night that if you don't close it up, you're going to freeze. And the winter you just close it up, and in the summer you just open it up. So those are actually a little bit easier. But I want the ability to leave town with my whole family and know that the greenhouse is just fine for 10, 14 days. And that's a big priority for me. Also, as I had talked about a little bit, I have a priority on growing food without outside support for both my humans and my animals. And I have a small herd of Dexters. I have a whole bunch of chickens. We're planning on some pigs when we get the yard finished. We have, to me, my food storage is all on the hoof. So I need my greenhouse to be able to provide for that. So that doesn't mean I want lots of strawberries and lots of lettuce. This is calories I'm trying to produce, and it's calories for animals as much or more than for me. And then I also have a priority on being able to monitor that remotely or control it, from a phone or from a PL, an input that a little keypad in the greenhouse. My kids could walk in there and use that. So that's also a priority. Let's talk really quickly about glazing angle. This basically just means all of this. This is from Purdue University. This little graph that you see here in the middle, all of this, what this means is the more perpendicular your glazing, whether that, whatever plastic or whatever glazing you're using, the more perpendicular it is to the angle of the sun, the more of the energy is going to come through it. If you have a very, very steep angle of your greenhouse and it's the summertime, very little of that energy is going to get through. If you're 90 degrees to the sun, most of that energy is going to get through. That's all that means. So when we're looking at what that effect is, the sun isn't always in the same spot. So we have to kind of pick a glazing angle that suits what we're after. So if I were in a colder climate, I might kind of bracket the cooler parts of the year and try to find a glazing angle that is more suitable for those cooler parts of the year. Obviously, I don't want to focus on that very lowest one where it says winter at 30 degrees, because that's exactly one day of the year. The rest of the year is somewhere between there and the summer, right? And all the way up there at the summer, that's only one day of the year. The spring and the fall values you see there, well, it hits those twice a year. So you kind of need to not be all the way down at the bottom. Even in a cold climate, you don't want to focus on the very bottom because it's only there once a year, one day of the year. So you need to kind of bracket the area or the kind of more of a typical yearly average of what your system is going to be seeing. If I was in warmer elevation, I would bracket that a little more to the higher elevation. If I was down in Flagstaff, I have a very different sun angle and they have a shorter winter. They have a little bit steeper sun. So maybe I would bracket that a little bit different than where I am here. So this is a different description of what I'm referring to. On the left side, you see a 45-degree angle of the glazing. So that's if you set the wall of your greenhouse, that front-facing wall at 45 degrees, in the summer, you're going to get almost all of that energy is going to come through. And you can see that there's just a little bit of energy that'll be reflected back off. However, if you set that front angle to 70 degrees, you're actually going to reflect the bulk of that energy off and very little of that energy will come through. It'll shed that energy just from that reflection angle, which is really good for us because, as I had mentioned before, the hardest part of a greenhouse isn't keeping it warm, it's keeping it cool. So in the winter, right, in the winter, our sun is a lot lower. This is a cold sun. There's not nearly as much energy. So at 45 degrees, you're still not really hitting the perfect angle to collect all of that energy. You're still going to bounce some of that off. But if you have that 70-degree, it's almost perfectly perpendicular. You're actually going to collect as much of that energy as possible. So in both summer and winter, the steeper, and this is for me, uh, I'm at 39 degrees is my latitude here. So you can look up your latitude and find the correct angle, but there's a lot of leeway. There's about, let me come back here really quickly. If you look at this, that big flat spot there from 0 to about 30 degrees where it really starts to change, there's a pretty big leeway of angle of incidence. So you don't have to be exact. You don't have to have it down to the exact number. Just understand what the consequences are of laying that down too far or putting it up too steeply. But these have consequences. These decisions that you make, they definitely have consequences. Here's kind of at the 45 degree, I have both the summer and the winter showing there. So you kind of see that area in the back. Well, what happens is you have a lot more floor space in a 45 degree. So if you need to fill up like a 24-foot depth for your greenhouse, if you do that with a 70-degree angle on the front, you're going to have a big shade area in the back that's going to be almost useless. So unless you go super, super tall with your 70-degree wall, which gets really expensive and harder to heat, harder to maintain all of your temperatures, but given this roughly the same overall height of your greenhouse, you're going to lose quite a bit of the depth of your greenhouse to go to that 70 degrees. That's okay. Some of the better greenhouses I've seen, such as that one, if you go to the Manti homestead, his greenhouse, I think, is 18 feet wide. That was outside to outside of the concrete. So the inside of the concrete is more like 16 feet wide. So he's like 16 feet wide and 110 feet long. Well, that works great. We did a very steep angle on his. He sheds the heat in the summer very nicely, and all of his plants are in the sun because he has such a long, narrow greenhouse. If you don't want a long, narrow greenhouse and you still need that square footage, maybe you'd better plan on a 45 degree, knowing that you're going to give up some performance in both the summer and the winter. Okay, so air ventilation. This is some of the pictures of mine in the middle. That's how we have to dig in my yard. I have to use a large excavator because I have so much rock. So we put pipes down, and I have a spider web of pipes all through my yard, and it goes all over the place. And I've actually been going through and replacing those pipes because I put them in as 6-inch, and they're not big enough. Mine was the first one. We've now done 8 of these, and we've learned that the more air you put in, the better it performs. So I'm actually going through and digging up my whole yard all over again, and I'm replacing 6-inch pipes. I'll replace a single 6-inch pipe with both an 8 and a 12. And so I'll dig down very, very deep, and I'll put one pipe down there, and then I'll cover that up with 2 or 3 feet of dirt and put the other pipe in. Normally, you don't want your pipes to be within a few feet of each other so that they don't influence the temperature of each other. But because it's so expensive and difficult for me to dig in my area, we just dig one trench, go a little bit deeper, and put both of those pipes in there, and that's how we're doing it. This one over on the right side that you see, that's Manti Homestead. If you go watch his YouTube channel, he's done a very good job of providing plenty of fresh air into his greenhouse. So, and he has some good videos on that, but that's all of his air lines coming back in to provide fresh air for his greenhouse there. Okay, so, oh, I'm sorry. I'm using the wrong slideshow here. what we need to understand is at the top of the greenhouse, and you see over here on the left side, the vent there, as that, if you put that vent up high in your greenhouse, as the greenhouse gets warm, and it doesn't matter if it's 10 degrees outside and you walk into your greenhouse and it's 40 degrees at the floor level and it's only 80 degrees all the way up at the peak, that's still a temperature gradient and the air will move. So if you can get it to move, and obviously in the summertime, it's going to be 150 or 180 at the top, and then as cool as you can get it at the bottom. So if you have a sealed system with all of these pipes going through the ground and you close up the whole greenhouse, as that hot air naturally escapes out whatever venting you have at the top, it's going to start to suck all of that cold air through the ground. As that cold air starts to pull in, when it's 100 degrees outside, you're still 45 to 50 degrees underground. So the slower you can pull that air in, the better it's going to condition that air to 50 degrees. Well, the only way to get that air to move slowly is to have lots and lots of piping, so that let's say you have 2 or 3 big ventilation fans like this. This is just a vent here that I've got pictured. If you put a fan on there, you don't want a 12-inch fan blowing out and then only a 12-inch duct bringing cool air in, because your air is going to be pulled in as fast as it was blowing out. You want that air coming in to go as slow as possible so that it gets conditioned down to the best temperature you can get. And once you have that really good temperature, then it finally hits a greenhouse. So in the summer, when it's 100 degrees outside, you could effectively be pulling in 80-degree air and cooling that entire greenhouse as you're bringing it in. It's very effective. Conversely, in the winter, if we want any kind of growth or anything going on through the winter, and winter doesn't mean, that 10 weeks that I just shut down. I'm talking even October, November, and February and March, when it's cold enough that you can't just open up the whole greenhouse, but you still want to have some kind of growth getting started. You need a fresh flow of carbon through your greenhouse. So if it gets down to, 20, 30 degrees, you're warming that air back up. You're getting a free 15, 20, 30 degrees out of the air temperature just by having this passive system that's pulling that conditioned air through. So it's extremely effective. The one thing that we have found, the more air you have, the better it works, the better everything works. It fixes all the problems. If you can't afford all of the air, at least stub some pipes out, and someday when you can afford it, put them in. But it's only limited on your wallet. The more air you can have, quite simply, the better your greenhouse will work. So even the air, like, it will cover a tremendous amount of sins on, if you need to have a 45-degree angle on your slope so that you get the width and your shade line is pushed to the back of your greenhouse better, that will work fine if you have a lot of air. If you have the perfect geometry for your area and you don't add air, it's not going to work. So the most important aspect of anything that you're designing in your greenhouse, consider that to be the delivery of conditioned air through this geothermal. If you focus on that, it will work. And if you spend your money somewhere, number one, spend it in quality glazing. Number two, spend it underground where you'll never see it, and the whole thing will work better. Put it into that air piping. The type of piping, I've been asked before, what type of piping should I use? Whatever's cheap. I have one friend who got some really cheap 16-inch steel pipe. It works great. Well, that's crazy expensive. You had to go buy it. The plastic pipe, it doesn't, it's not as thermally conductive, so it doesn't change the temperature as well as steel pipe would. But I can buy it for a tenth the price of steel pipe. So put 10 times of it in. So it doesn't really matter what you use, if you use as much of it as possible. And I try to use 8 to 12 inch, 6-inch will work, 4-inch will work, but it's starting to, you're trying to suck that air through a very long straw. So the bigger it is, the slower the air moves and the more it will be conditioned. So, and there's caveats to everything, certain soil types transfer heat better to the pipe. There's a whole lot of science that goes into that. But at the end of the day, the more air you have, the better the whole greenhouse will function. And I think we're just about out of time, Jamin. I'm pretty well wrapped up here as well. So if anybody has any questions, I'll take some questions.
Awesome. Well, awesome. Thank you. I actually have a couple questions just right off the bat. One of the things I recognize that you're doing here that I actually haven't seen a lot of people do is you're going vertically rather than horizontally with your tubing, which is excellent for space saving. Is that what you did at Manti? Is that how he installed his geothermal?
The geothermal that you see. So what we try to do is bring the air vertically up into the grow beds itself, because I really don't want any of that air to be brought up right underneath your exit. I don't want it to short circuit and just dump right out of your exit. So we try to actually bring it up into the grow beds so that it's nicely distributed throughout the grow bed and you get fresh air all around right there. And then we try to screen it and protect it so you don't get any rodents or anything that are traveling back and forth on that highway. Some of what he's doing, and we do this on several of the other ones as well, we'll do like a 3-foot pipe as a big manifold and bring 4 or 6 or 8-inch lines into that and out of that back into the grow bed. So there's a million different ways to skin that cat. None of them are right and none of them are wrong. As long as you kind of distribute your air throughout the greenhouse and you have as much capacity underground, it's going to work.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Well, we'll just go ahead and open the floor up for anybody else that has questions before we wrap it up here. And I believe you have the ability to unmute yourself. So if you have a question, should you feel to select that button and pop right in. And if there are no other questions, I'll just kind of rip off a little bit here before we adjourn.
Yeah.
One of the things that I kind of mentioned in the beginning here, permaculture property design is based on a level of self-sufficiency and closing the loop, closing the system. And so when we're looking at a lot of the properties, majority of the properties that we work with, every single one of them has an element where a greenhouse applies. And you mentioned right in the beginning, hoop houses. There are some hoop houses that I've seen very successful and last for many years, particularly the ones we use in Missouri that our good partner out there produced.
Oh, interesting.
Sustain.
I'd like to see those. Do they have less wind than we have in Utah?
Oh no, we've got plenty of wind. I wouldn't say it's as
Okay.
bad as Wyoming wind, but it gets pretty hefty out there. We're in Tornado Alley.
Okay.
His design was actually pretty unique in the way that he didn't do anything solid on the runners of the pipe, lengthwise of the hoop house. He actually just did PVC pipe, which typically is not very wind resistant.
Right.
But the way that he did the base and then the two end walls shores up the whole thing, and then he concretes the ends on the doorways, and so there's quite a bit of stability there. But his model is very cheap and inexpensive. The problem with hoop houses that I have, whether or not they're structurally integritous or not, is that they're very difficult to maintain in the wintertime for anything passive system wise. So you mentioned right off the bat how even the geothermal system even the geodesic greenhouse system that your buddy has around the corner from you was difficult to feed energy wise. It wasn't very energy efficient. And geothermal greenhouses are cool because they have the ability to work with natural elements. And geodesic, the dome greenhouses, are very interesting designs because of the way that air flows through and then back down. But if you don't have the right systems installed and developed right up in the beginning, and like you said, it's about the size of your wallet in the beginning,
Hmm.
You're battling things that you don't need to battle. And a lot of people, just for the sake of, they're looking at space, or they're looking at their personal desires of just creating something DIY and quick and easy, or something like that. And then long term, it's causing them more work, it's causing them more grief, more money, and stress, and then ultimately a sense of failure, because you're battling elements that are bigger than you. And so what you've done in
That's a
creating a
really
passion
interesting
system.
comment here in our area. As I started on mine, the county building code guys, the inspector and the county reviewer, he told me don't bother building a greenhouse. And I said, no, I'm a structural engineer. Like, I'm going to figure this out. And he says, no, we've seen them for years and years. Everybody tries them. You're at 6,500 feet. We're a very cold climate. Just give up
Mhm.
on it. They're not going to work. And we've proved him wrong. But to your point, nobody has invested correctly and had one that lasted.
Yeah. Yeah, it's completely about design. It really
Yeah.
is. Before you push the button, before you pay the man, whatever it is, you get the design. So that's part of the reason I'm so excited to be working with you and helping these families we work with, because your ability to look at this as a passive system, and right from the get-go function from a design perspective with your skills as engineer, really plays a key role in the success long term that a lot of people just don't have access to. Are you familiar with the Nebraska citrus in the snow? I
Citrus in
forget
the
what the
snow. I am.
Yes.
And the interesting part about his, you have to pay really, really close attention. You have any idea how much power he uses? It's
I actually have
outrageous.
not.
You have to pay really close attention to his video, but how he changes his temperature, he has big ductwork that goes through the ground, and those are separate from his ductwork that brings in fresh air. And so when he needs to
Hmm.
drop or increase his temperatures, he turns on these fans that are a closed loop to condition that air within a closed loop. Okay.
Oh,
And he has mentioned that at certain times of the year, they can turn off their fans for a couple of hours, a couple of
interesting.
hours a day. He's got big fans running 24/7 most of the year. I
So what
don't.
is he powering that with?
Right. That's it. He doesn't go into that in those videos. He doesn't talk. So he has a really cool little system, and I really applaud a lot of what he's got going on. I would love to go meet him and find out what his energy demand is, because it's not zero.
Interesting. Yeah, a big piece of what I like that he was doing was he utilized the back wall of the greenhouse for thermal mass, and
Hmm.
and specifically the ambient temperature he's capturing in the black water barrels he uses.
Hmm.
Um, Water has an excellent thermal retention rate, and so
And it's cheap.
utilizing that wasted space in the back, or even using maybe growing vines on it vertically, using the space for something. I would like to see at one of your future designs if you could do in a water catchment on the side and plumb it back into the greenhouse.
So on mine, we put gutters on the house and the greenhouse, and we send all of the water. I have a 4,000 gallon water storage out in the yard, and then we pump it back into the greenhouse so that I can bring it up to temperature before I water. And so we are
Hmm.
catching all of our water. We are cycling all that. And the biggest reason for that is my water from the wells here that service my house have a pH of about 8.3, 8.4, and they're so full of bicarbonate that they've killed a lot of our plants before we realized what was going on. But snowfall and rainfall is perfectly clean and clear for us. So we're trying to capture as much of that as we can so that I don't have to filter as much of the water.
Yeah.
So we definitely use a lot of that, but um, I I have no heat in my greenhouse. In the winter time, we have electricity, but it's just used for lights. I don't have a very high capacity for amps, so I can't run any kind of heaters, no electric heaters, no furnaces. We're on propane, so it's not cost effective for me to try to run some kind of a burner. Um, and I get all the way down to about 10 below pretty frequently through the winter, and I have no energy input, and I don't freeze. I have all my citrus and avocados and pomegranate. So we also don't have a lot of water in there. And so just having the concrete up against the dirt and a good design and, nice snug system that works well, I have
Mm,
no energy input and I don't freeze my, I mean, I have a tomato plant that is like 4 years old. So they just keep going and we don't worry about that. So
yeah,
there are a lot of ways to store that energy. I think if you do a good job of designing the greenhouse, you can reclaim all of that footage on your floor plan and just leave it all as plantable area.
absolutely. One of the draws for me on a geodesic style greenhouse is that surface height. You have so much airspace that you can grow trees and vertical. And really, I haven't had the chance to experiment with that myself in my own greenhouses, but it's something that I've always been curious to see if somebody could produce a food forest on the inside of a biodome, basically.
Yeah, we're
But
kind of
energy
working on
efficient.
that. This one here, this is a banana you see here. He has all the climates, all of the different types in here, and he's 18 feet ground to peak. I'm 20 feet ground to peak on mine, but the back wall on mine is more like 14, and the back wall on his, I think, is 11.
Oh, that's
So
not bad.
we have enough room that when you're talking about the trees and stuff, we try to make sure we get the dwarf trees. So I have maybe 15 pomegranate and citrus trees, and they have plenty of room to do what they're going to do.
Mm.
We have kiwi and stuff like that that can grow up the back wall and kind of spread out and go across the bottom of the trusses. So we have lots of space that what you're talking about can happen. But you do have to be a little more selective on what variety of plants you pick to fit that.
Yeah. Now, from an engineering perspective, what are you doing to combat root systems that dive into the concrete forms, or however you're solidifying the structure in the ground?
So most of the trees are in their own pots, steel pots. My son and I have a welding shop, so we
Mm,
built our own little steel pots. Um, but also it's important on trees, like we always think about the pruning of those trees every year, but you really do need to prune the roots as well. So about every 3 to 5 years, you should probably just kind of lift that out of the pot and heavily prune the roots back and then keep going. Otherwise they'll take over
yeah.
everything.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've got them in pots, they'll be root bound in a hurry. Now, why do
Well, they're
pots? Why
very
close off
large
the
pots.
tree?
So
Okay.
we've had them for 4 years and they're still not root bound.
Oh, great, great.
So
Why, just out of curiosity, why did you decide to do that instead of leaving the base open to the earth?
my soil is so bad it'll kill everything.
Oh,
So it literally, my pH is 8.3 to 8.4. It is so full of bicarbonate that if you
mm,
leave a puddle there and then let it dry, you'll have a salty crust that is left over. So we cannot plant in any of our native soils.
that's difficult. So one of the drawbacks of a greenhouse that drives me crazy. I wish we didn't have to deal with it, but really it is. The inside of a greenhouse is your ecosystem. It is a man-made ecosystem. Every element produced in a greenhouse is managed and controlled and dominated by you, the manager or the developer of the greenhouse. And so it's difficult to, from a permaculture perspective, to look at a greenhouse as something that can be 100% self-sustaining, because there are so many elements that just don't collaborate, don't work with the natural environment that you're trying to produce this greenhouse
Mhm.
in to begin with. And so it
And what
looks to
we've
me,
learned from that is the most important thing you can do is start killing plants, like
yeah,
just experimenting. Like, and there's no shame in how many I have killed hundreds of dollars worth of avocados, and those damn things are still not thriving. But we've learned a lot about avocados, and they're an extremely weak plant. They're very fragile, and so we've
yeah,
learned a tremendous amount. The same thing with moringa. We've played with moringa a lot because I'm really interested in moringa. I don't think it's going to work here. I really want it to, but my idea of this 3.5 season greenhouse where I get down to 40 degrees or so, that's not conducive to moringa. And so, one of the things we're doing with that, we're actually developing our own new grow bed system. It's a welded system where we build a frame and then we hang a conveyor belt on the inside, and it's It's a super cheap, indestructible grow bed system. And that's what we're using in our green. I'm sorry, I don't have any pictures of that right now. It's kind of a cool system. But combined with that, what we're doing is developing a secondary tenting system so that my moringas and my avocados and any true tropicals that I decide to try again. Now, my friend over in Manti, he is growing bananas and stuff. That was those pictures that we saw. Let me right here. These are bananas. He's on a natural gas system, so he can add some heat pretty cost effectively, and he does do that through the winter. I don't. I'm completely off grid, or could be if I put in a very small solar system. So his goals and mine are a little bit different, and he's working towards becoming off grid as well. But in the grow bed, if I set up a small area where my more fragile plants are, I can just have a removable tent that drops down over that. And suddenly that little square footage inside the greenhouse is an extra 10 to 15 degrees warmer. And so I can even further isolate a couple of trees or a couple of plants and know that I'm going to keep those healthy. So there's lots of techniques to this, but I think the important part is start killing stuff. Get out there and
Absolutely.
experiment with it. Learn. I mean, we had no idea that every time we watered, we were killing our plants. And that was
Mhm.
what happened. Was I had a beautiful pomegranate, and it went to blossom way earlier in the year than I expected it to. The blossoms looked very poor. They all dried up and fell off and died. Didn't set any fruit. And then by August, the whole plant looked like it was going into fall. The leaves turned yellow, they all fell off, and then slowly the plant died. And we could not figure it out. And I was just kind of mad at it for a few months and just kind of stared at it and shook my fist at it. And then I finally decided to yank it out of the pot. And the pot that it was in is all purchased soil. It was all, none of it was my native soil. And when I went to pull it out, about an inch below the surface, I had an inch thick crust of salt that was so hard, I had to get a chisel and break it up in order to pull the dead tree out. Well, that was my education on where did this salt come from? It can only come from my water. So then rabbit hole after rabbit hole about chemistry class. Man, that was 20 years ago there, and so I went back down these rabbit holes of all this water chemistry and what to do about it, and started calling ag agents in the county. And anyway, went to a lot of effort for that and realized that we can't water with our native water or we'll kill everything. And so even
Mm.
outside in my yard, my fruit trees, my service berries, the goji berries, all of the stuff that I have planted outside, all of it we water now with RO filtered water, and they've all just taken off. It's amazing the difference that even those outside can't deal with our native water.
Interesting. That's awesome. I love that you got enough of a timeline of experimentation to have some notes and some solid takeaways. That's a piece a lot of people
You call it
miss.
experimentation. The reality is it's killing stuff. And I like to say that because I want people to be encouraged, not discouraged when they start killing stuff. Like, don't worry about it. That was a learning point. That was a marker in your education when you killed that thing. Don't feel bad
Absolutely.
about it. Learn and move on and go kill something else.
Okay, go kill someone else. I like that very much. That's a good mindset to approach it from. Well, thank you so much, Shane, for being on here. It looks like we're a bit past time here, so we'll just go ahead and adjourn. I
Okay.
am gonna have the recording posted up on our YouTube as well as here in the TIAG community.
Okay.
And then I'll send you a copy of that as well.
I'm
So
going to
you may
get
see it
back to
on the
this in case
podcast.
anybody has any questions. There's my email. Feel free to drop me a line. I love talking
Yes.
about greenhouses. Um, I, I have I have made it a point. I don't make my living off of greenhouses. This is just something I love doing. So if you need if any of your listeners have a desire to learn or have questions, just have them drop me a line, and uh, that's just what I it's free. I just love to try to help people grow food.
Awesome. And for those that might be listening in on this, the email is shane.watsonpe@gmail.com.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, thank you very much, Shane. You have a wonderful night and everybody else as well. And we'll call it a night from here.
Okay. Thank you.